The marriage broker's cart rattled away down the dusty road, leaving Kragtha standing alone in front of the farmhouse with nothing but a travel-worn sack and a burning sense of fury in her chest that threatened to consume her entirely. She had not asked for this, had not wanted this. Her father, desperate to secure an alliance with the human settlements after their clan's lands had been ravaged by the Southern Wars, had traded her like livestock to fulfill some treaty obligation she barely understood. And now here she stood, a full-blooded orc woman of 20 summers, green-skinned and proud, staring at a modest wooden farmhouse surrounded by fields of wheat that swayed in the late spring breeze like golden waves on an endless sea. The door opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall for a human, broad-shouldered in a way that spoke of honest labor rather than battlefield glory, with sun-darkened skin and hands that looked capable of both gentleness and strength. His hair was the color of rich earth, slightly too long, falling into eyes that were a startling shade of blue-green like the shallow parts of the river near her childhood home. He wore simple clothes, a linen shirt rolled up to the elbows and canvas trousers, and he moved with an easy confidence as he descended the 3 wooden steps to stand before her. "You must be Kragtha," he said, and his voice was deeper than she had expected, warm like honey left in the sun. "I'm Jakob Peterson. Welcome to Greenbrier Farm." She straightened to her full height, which put her eye to eye with him despite most human men being shorter than orc women. Her small tusks protruded slightly from her lower jaw as she said it stubbornly, her pointed ears flattening back against her skull in a display of displeasure that any orc would recognize immediately. "I won't be tamed," she said, her voice low and fierce. "I don't care what contract my father signed or what promises were made. I am not some docile human girl who will cook and clean and smile sweetly while you treat her like property." She expected anger. Expected him to assert his authority as her husband in the way the marriage broker had warned her human men did, with violence if necessary. Expected him to try to intimidate her with threats or demands or the backing of human law that saw orcs as little better than chattel. Instead, Jakob Peterson smiled. It transformed his entire face, crinkling the corners of those unusual eyes and revealing straight white teeth. The smile reached all the way up to soften the worry lines on his forehead, and something about it made her breath catch in her throat in a way she absolutely refused to examine too closely. "Good," he said simply. "I need a partner, not a servant. This farm is 200 acres, and I've been running it alone since my father passed 2 winters ago. The work is endless, the seasons are unforgiving, and I could use someone strong enough to help me wrestle a plow through rocky soil and stubborn enough to keep going when everything seems impossible. If you're willing to work, we'll get along just fine." Kragtha stared at him, her prepared arguments dying on her tongue. She had spent the entire 3-day journey from her clan's lands rehearsing what she would say, how she would fight, how she would make it clear that she would never submit to this arrangement. But he had not asked her to submit. He had asked her to work. "I don't understand," she said finally, and hated how uncertain her voice sounded. Jakob's smile gentled into something more understanding. "You've had a long journey. Come inside. I've got stew on the fire and fresh bread from this morning. We can talk over food and I'll explain how things work here. No obligations beyond listening." Fair. Every instinct told her to refuse, to maintain her distance and her anger like armor. But her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, reminding her that she had eaten nothing but dried meat and stale flatbread for days. And something about the way he had stepped back, giving her space rather than crowding her, made her feel like perhaps this human man might actually be as strange as his words suggested. "Fair," she agreed cautiously, and followed him into the farmhouse. The interior was clean, but clearly the domain of someone who lived alone. Practical rather than decorative. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a pot hanging over flames that sent the rich smell of meat and vegetables into the air. A solid wooden table occupied the center of the main room, surrounded by mismatched chairs. Shelves lined the walls, holding dishes and supplies in organized rows. A doorway led to what she assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder in the corner climbed to a loft space above. Jakob moved to the fireplace and began ladling stew into 2 wooden bowls. "Sit anywhere," he said. "I'm not formal about such things." Kragtha chose a chair that put her back to the wall and gave her a clear view of both the door and the windows. Old habits from a childhood spent in a clan that valued strategic thinking. She watched as Jakob set a bowl in front of her along with a thick slice of bread, then took his own seat across the table rather than beside her. Another choice that gave her space, she realized. The stew was good. Better than good, actually. Rich beef broth with carrots, potatoes, onions, and herbs she could not quite identify. She ate quickly at first, then forced herself to slow down, maintaining what dignity she could manage. "My father bought this land 30 years ago," Jakob said, eating his own meal at a more leisurely pace. "It was nothing but rocks and weeds then. He spent his whole life building it into something that could sustain a family. He was a good man, a hard worker, and he taught me everything about farming. But he also taught me that the most important crop you can grow is respect, for the land, for the animals, for the people you work with." He paused to tear off a piece of bread and dip it in his stew. "When he died, I inherited everything. The land, the house, the debts. I've been working myself to exhaustion trying to keep up with it all alone. The harvest season nearly killed me last year. I knew I needed help, but I couldn't afford to hire workers, and most folks around here already have their own farms to tend." "So you bought an orc bride," Kragtha said flatly, anger creeping back into her voice. "Like purchasing a plow horse." "No," Jakob said firmly, meeting her eyes. "I agreed to a marriage alliance that was proposed through the peace brokers working between our peoples. I paid the customary bride price, yes, but that money went to support the treaty negotiations and provide resources for orc families displaced by the war. I didn't buy you. I entered into a legal partnership that both our people's laws recognize." "It's the same thing," she insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" He leaned back in his chair, studying her with those disconcerting blue-green eyes. "Tell me something, Kragtha. If you had stayed with your clan, would you have had any say in who you eventually married? Or would your father and the clan elders have arranged that according to what served the clan's interests?" She wanted to argue, but she could not. Orc marriages were always arranged to strengthen clan bonds, to forge alliances, to ensure the strongest possible offspring. She had never expected to choose her own mate any more than she had expected to choose her own name. "At least I would have married another orc," she said. "Not a human." "Fair point," Jakob acknowledged. "And I won't pretend this isn't strange for both of us. But here's what I can offer you. A home for as long as you want it. Fair wages for your work, paid in coin that's yours to keep or spend as you choose. Respect as an equal partner in running this farm. And if, after a year, you decide you want to leave, I'll give you travel money and a letter of reference, and you can go wherever you wish. No strings, no obligations." Kragtha stared at him. "You would let me leave?" "I won't keep anyone who doesn't want to be here," Jakob said simply. "That's not a partnership. That's imprisonment. And I'm a farmer, not a jailer." She did not know what to say to that. The marriage broker had made it clear that this arrangement was permanent, that she was bound by law and custom, that she had no choice. But this strange human man was telling her something entirely different, and she could not tell if he was sincere or if this was some elaborate trap. "I need to think," she said finally. "Of course." Jakob stood and began clearing the dishes. "The loft upstairs has a bed and privacy. You can sleep there. I'll take the bedroom down here. Take all the time you need to settle in. Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'll show you around the farm and explain what needs doing. But tonight, just rest." He moved to the wash basin and began cleaning the dishes, humming tunelessly under his breath. Kragtha watched him for a long moment, searching for any sign of deception or hidden cruelty. But all she saw was a tired man doing evening chores, occasionally pushing that too long hair out of his eyes. She climbed the ladder to the loft and found a space that was smaller than she had expected but surprisingly comfortable. A real bed with a straw mattress and wool blankets, a chest for storage, a small window that looked out over the wheat fields, now turning silver in the moonlight. It was more privacy than she had ever had in the clan's communal longhouses. Kragtha lay down on the bed without bothering to remove more than her boots. She could hear Jakob moving around below, the soft sounds of him banking the fire and preparing for sleep. Her mind raced with too many thoughts to process. Anger at her father for sending her away. Confusion about this human who seemed to defy everything she had been taught about his people. Exhaustion from days of travel and emotional turmoil. And underneath it all, a tiny, treacherous spark of something that might have been hope. She fell asleep still fully dressed, one hand on the knife she wore at her belt, just in case. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of something cooking. Kragtha woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was before the previous day's events came rushing back. She sat up, her muscles stiff from sleeping in her clothes, and climbed down the ladder to find Jakob at the fireplace, cooking what appeared to be eggs and bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Morning," he said when he noticed her. "I've got coffee if you want it, or there's milk in the cold cellar." "Coffee," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. He poured a cup from a battered pot and handed it to her. The coffee was strong and slightly bitter, but it helped clear the fog from her mind. She drank it standing near the door, maintaining distance, still not entirely sure what to make of this situation. Jakob served breakfast without much conversation, giving her space to wake up fully. They ate eggs and bacon and more of that excellent bread, this time toasted over the fire. When they were done, he stood and gestured toward the door. "Ready for the tour?" She nodded and followed him outside into the bright morning sunshine. Greenbrier Farm was larger than it had appeared in the evening light. The main house sat on a gentle rise, surrounded by the wheat fields that stretched in golden waves toward the horizon. To the north, she could see a barn painted red with white trim, and beyond that, several smaller outbuildings. To the south, more fields, some planted with what looked like corn, others lying fallow. A stream cut through the eastern boundary, lined with willows that provided shade. 200 acres total, Jakob said, pride evident in his voice. 100 in wheat, 40 in corn, 20 in vegetables for the local market, and 40 I'm letting rest this season to recover the soil, plus the pastures for the livestock. He led her toward the barn, walking with long strides that she had no trouble matching with her orc's strong legs. Inside the barn, she found 2 draft horses, several milk cows, a dozen chickens, and a pig that looked enormously fat. "This is thunder and lightning," Jakob said, patting the horses affectionately. "They're brothers, both geldings, both strong as anything but gentle. They'll pull the plow, the wagon, whatever needs pulling. The cows are Bessie, Marigold, and Clover. They need milking twice a day. The chickens are, well, chickens. They lay eggs and cause chaos in equal measure, and that's Winston. He pointed at the pig. He's being fattened for autumn, though I've gotten a bit attached, truth be told. Kragtha walked along the stalls, examining the animals with a critical eye. They were all well cared for, healthy, clean. The barn itself was organized, tools hanging on the walls in neat rows, hay stacked properly, floors swept. Whatever else Jakob Peterson might be, he was clearly a conscientious farmer. "What would you want me to do?" she asked. "Whatever you're willing to do," Jakob said. "The wheat will be ready for harvest in about 6 weeks. Between now and then, it needs to be monitored for pests and disease. The vegetables need constant weeding, watering, and tending. The animals need daily care. The fences need repairs. There's always something breaking or wearing out that needs fixing. I usually spend my mornings on the urgent tasks and my afternoons on whatever I've been putting off." He showed her the vegetable garden next, several acres of neatly planted rows containing carrots, beans, peas, lettuce, onions, and more. Everything was labeled with small wooden stakes, organized with the precision of someone who took farming seriously. Weeds were already threatening to overtake the narrower paths between rows. "This is actually my biggest problem right now," Jakob admitted. "I can't keep up with the weeding. If I let it go much longer, the vegetables will be choked out, and I'll lose a significant portion of my income for the season. I've been working on it every spare moment, but there's only so much one person can do." Kragtha knelt and examined the soil. It was rich and dark, well nourished. The vegetables themselves looked healthy where they were not being crowded by weeds. She had helped with her clan's gardens as a child, knew the basics of cultivation. This was not so different. "I could start here," she said, surprising herself, "while I decide what I want to do long term." Jakob's face lit up with that transformative smile again. "That would help immensely. Thank you. There are tools in the shed over there, gloves if you want them, and a water skin hanging by the door. Work as much or as little as you want. I'll be in the north field checking the wheat." He left her there, heading off across the farm with that easy, confident stride. Kragtha stood among the vegetables for a long moment, wondering what she was doing. She had meant to stay angry, to resist, to make it clear she would not be part of this arrangement. Instead, she was volunteering to weed a garden, but her hands itched for work. 3 days of sitting in a cart had left her restless, and her orc nature craved physical labor. So she found a hoe in the shed, chose a row, and began cutting down the weeds with efficient, powerful strokes. The morning passed in a rhythm of work. Chop, pull, toss, move forward, repeat. The sun climbed higher, warming her green skin. Sweat dampened her dark hair. Her muscles, unused to this particular motion, began to protest. But there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the clean rows emerge from the chaos of weeds, about knowing that her efforts were allowing the vegetables to thrive. Jakob returned around midday with a basket containing bread, cheese, and apples. He surveyed her progress and let out a low whistle. "You've done more in one morning than I've managed in a week. You're a miracle worker." "I'm strong," Kragtha said bluntly. "Orcs are stronger than humans. This is not difficult work for me." "Strength is one thing," Jakob said, settling onto the grass in the shade of a nearby apple tree and gesturing for her to join him. "But you're also efficient. You're cutting the weeds off at the root level instead of just pulling them like I was doing. They'll be slower to come back that way." She sat, maintaining a careful distance, and accepted the food he offered. "My clan grew vegetables near the river. I learned young that if you want the plants you need to survive, you have to be ruthless with the plants you don't." They ate in companionable silence for a while. A breeze rustled through the apple tree's leaves, providing relief from the heat. In the distance, she could hear birdsong and the soft lowing of the cows in the barn. "Can I ask you something?" Jakob said eventually. Kragtha tensed but nodded. "What was your life like before you came here?" She considered refusing to answer, considered maintaining her walls. But something about the genuine curiosity in his voice, the complete lack of judgment, made her want to respond honestly. "Chaotic," she said finally. "My clan has always lived on the southern border, near the territories that humans and orcs have been fighting over for generations. We're warriors first, everything else second. I learned to fight before I learned to read, learned to wield a blade before I learned to wield a needle. My brothers are all soldiers. My father is a war chief. My mother died in a border skirmish when I was 12. "I'm sorry," Jakob said quietly, and she could hear the sincerity in it. "It's the life we knew," Kragtha continued. "But when the Southern Wars intensified 2 years ago, everything changed. Our lands were destroyed. Our crops burned. Half our warriors killed. The clan elders decided we needed peace, needed alliances with human settlements, needed anything that would help us survive. So they started negotiating treaties, offering orc brides to human men in border territories, hoping to build relationships that would protect what little we have left. And you were chosen for that." "I was volunteered by my father," she corrected bitterly. "He said it was an honor, that I would be helping secure the clan's future, that my sacrifice would be remembered." She laughed without humor. "What he meant was that I was the most expendable. My brothers are valuable as warriors. My sisters are already married into important clans. But me, I was always too stubborn, too outspoken, too difficult, so they sent me away." Jakob was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My father used to say that the people who get called difficult are usually just the ones brave enough to say what everyone else is thinking. I think you were probably the strongest one in your family, and that scared them." Kragtha looked at him sharply, searching for mockery, but found only honest observation. Something in her chest tightened in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. "What about you?" she asked, turning the conversation away from herself. "What was your life like before?" Jakob stretched out on the grass, hands behind his head, staring up through the apple tree's branches at the blue sky beyond. "Simpler, maybe. Lonelier, definitely. My mother died when I was young, so it was just my father and me. He taught me everything about farming, about respecting the land and the animals, about honest work. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. Then 3 years ago he got sick. Something in his lungs that the healers couldn't cure. He fought it for almost a year, but eventually—" Jakob's voice trailed off. "I'm sorry," Kragtha said, echoing his earlier words. "Thank you. After he passed, I inherited this place and all the responsibility that comes with it. I've been trying to honor his legacy, to keep the farm thriving like he would have wanted. But it's been hard alone. There's so much work, and some days I feel like I'm drowning in it all. That's part of why I agreed to this marriage arrangement. I need help, yes, but I also—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I also need someone to share this with, someone to talk to at the end of long days, someone who understands what it means to work towards something bigger than yourself." He turned his head to look at her directly. "I know you didn't choose to come here. I know this isn't what you wanted. But I hope that maybe, in time, you'll find that it's not as bad as you feared. And if you don't, if you really want to leave after giving it a fair chance, I'll keep my promise. No tricks, no strings." Kragtha held his gaze, seeing the honesty there, the vulnerability. This human man had just shared his own pain, his own loneliness, without any apparent attempt to manipulate her sympathy. It was disarming in a way she had not expected. "I'll stay through the harvest," she heard herself say. "After that, I'll decide." Jakob's smile was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. "That's all I can ask for. Thank you, Kragtha." The rest of the afternoon passed in more work. Kragtha returned to the vegetable garden while Jakob went to repair a section of fence that was leaning dangerously. They worked separately but somehow together, each contributing to the farm's ongoing needs. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Jakob called her back to the house for dinner. This time, he showed her how to cook the meal, patiently explaining his process for making a simple chicken stew with vegetables from the garden. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he chopped and stirred, and Kragtha found herself actually interested in learning. Her clan had taught her warrior skills, survival skills, but very little about the domestic arts. There had always been older women to handle cooking, and she had been more interested in weapons training anyway. But watching Jakob work, seeing the care he put into even this simple task, made her realize that there was a kind of strength in nurturing as well as in fighting. That creating something nourishing was its own form of power. They ate together again at the wooden table, and this time the silence between them felt less awkward, more natural. Jakob told her stories about the neighboring farms, about the small community of settlers who helped each other during difficult times. He spoke with genuine fondness about the old widow, 2 miles north, who made the best pies in the territory, about the blacksmith to the south who could fix anything, about the family with 6 children to the east who always had something breaking or needing help. "They'll want to meet you eventually," Jakob said. "Fair warning, they're going to be curious. We don't have many orcs in the settlement, and most folks have only heard stories. Some of those stories aren't kind." "I'm used to being feared," Kragtha said flatly. "Maybe," Jakob acknowledged. "But I think once they get to know you, they'll see what I'm already starting to see. That you're strong, yes, but also dedicated, intelligent, and honest. Those are qualities any community values." Kragtha did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But later, as she climbed the ladder to her loft and settled into bed, she found herself thinking about his words, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this strange arrangement might be more bearable than she had feared. The days began to blur together in a rhythm of work and routine. Kragtha woke with the sun, helped Jakob with the morning chores, then spent most of her day in the vegetable garden while he tended to other tasks around the farm. They ate meals together, shared stories gradually and carefully, and slowly began to learn each other's habits and preferences. She discovered that Jakob sang while he worked, old farming songs with simple melodies that somehow made the labor feel lighter. That he had a talent for carpentry, and spent his evenings carving small wooden figures that he gave away to children in the settlement. That he was unfailingly patient with the animals, even when they were being difficult, and that he could coax even the most stubborn hen to lay eggs with soft words and gentle handling. He learned that Kragtha preferred to work in silence, that she had a sharp sense of humor that emerged when she felt comfortable, and that she was fiercely protective of anything under her care. When a fox tried to get into the chicken coop one night, she heard it despite being asleep and was out the door with her knife in hand before Jakob even woke. She chased the predator off with a ferocity that left him slightly terrified and deeply impressed. "Remind me never to get on your bad side," he said the next morning, examining the deep gouges her knife had left in the fence post where she had struck at the fleeing fox. "You would be dead before you realized you were on my bad side," Kragtha replied, but there was no real menace in it. Almost a tease, 3 weeks into her stay, Jakob suggested she accompany him to the weekly market in the nearby settlement. Kragtha was immediately wary, remembering his warning about how the locals might react to her, but Jakob was insistent. "You can't hide on the farm forever," he said gently. "And besides, I need help hauling the vegetables we're selling. You've done most of the work growing them. You should get to see the profit." So she went, sitting beside him on the wagon as thunder and lightning pulled them down the dusty road toward the settlement. It was barely large enough to be called a town, just a collection of buildings clustered around a central square where farmers set up tables to sell their goods. But to Kragtha, used to her clan's temporary camps and communal longhouses, it seemed impossibly organized and permanent. The reactions to her presence were immediate and varied. Some people stared openly, whispering behind their hands. Others quickly looked away, ushering children behind them. A few, mostly older folks who looked like they had seen their share of hardship, simply nodded in acknowledgement and went about their business. Jakob set up his table with practiced efficiency, displaying the vegetables in neat rows. Kragtha stood behind him, trying to appear smaller than her full height, keeping her expression neutral. But she could feel the weight of judgment, the fear and suspicion, and it made her want to snarl and bare her tusks and prove them all right about orcs being dangerous. Then an older woman approached, the one Jakob had mentioned who made excellent pies. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in a bun and eyes that were sharp but not unkind. She looked Kragtha up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen much in her life and was not easily shocked. "So you're the orc bride everyone's talking about," the woman said bluntly. "I am," Kragtha replied, lifting her chin. You're taller than I expected. Prettier, too." The woman turned to Jakob. "You treating her right, Jakob Peterson?" "Doing my best, Mrs. Vance," Jakob said with a slight smile. "See that you do. A man who mistreats his wife, orc or human, deserves what he gets." Mrs. Vance turned back to Kragtha. "You're welcome to visit my farm anytime, girl. I've got 4 sons, all grown and moved away, and I miss having women to talk to. Gets lonely with just my fool husband muttering about crops all day." Something in Kragtha's chest loosened at the unexpected kindness. "Thank you," she managed. Mrs. Vance bought a basket of vegetables and moved on. Others followed, some still wary but willing to do business. Jakob was friendly and professional with everyone, never once treating Kragtha as anything other than his equal partner. When people asked questions about her, he deflected politely but firmly, making it clear that her presence was not up for debate. By midday, they had sold most of their stock. Jakob handed Kragtha a small pouch of coins. "Your share of the profits," he said, "like I promised. Fair wages for fair work." Kragtha stared at the coins in her palm, more money than she had ever personally owned. In the clan, everything was shared, communal. Individual wealth was not a concept that existed. But now she held actual currency, earned through her own labor, and it felt powerful in a way she had not anticipated. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You earned it," Jakob replied simply. They loaded the empty crates back onto the wagon and began the journey home. Kragtha was quiet, processing the morning's events. The settlement had not been as hostile as she had feared, though she knew some of that was due to Jakob's presence and reputation. Still, Mrs. Vance's kindness had been genuine, and a few other people had been cautiously friendly. It was more than she had expected. "That wasn't so bad," Jakob said, echoing her thoughts. "No," Kragtha admitted, "it wasn't." That night, as they prepared dinner together in a routine that was becoming comfortable, Jakob cleared his throat in the way he did when he was working up to saying something important. "So, there's a festival in a few weeks," he said, focusing intently on the carrots he was chopping. "It's a midsummer celebration. The whole settlement comes together for music, dancing, food. It's a nice time. I was thinking maybe we could go, together, if you wanted." Kragtha paused in stirring the pot, considering. The idea of being surrounded by so many humans, being on display as Jakob's strange orc wife, made her stomach clench with anxiety. But she also found herself curious about this human tradition, about the community that Jakob clearly cared for. "Will there be dancing?" she asked. "Yes. Traditional stuff, mostly. Circle dances, partner dances, nothing too complicated. I don't know how to dance, not human dances." Jakob looked up from his carrots and his smile was soft and encouraging. "I could teach you, if you wanted to learn." Kragtha thought about it. About putting herself in such a vulnerable position, learning something new, potentially looking foolish. But she also thought about Mrs. Vance's kindness, about Jakob's patience, about the fact that she had told him she would stay through harvest, and that meant making some effort to integrate into this life. "Teach me," she said. So they started dance lessons in the evenings after the work was done. Jakob pushed the table against the wall to create space in the main room, and he patiently walked Kragtha through the basic steps of the dances she would likely encounter at the festival. She was clumsy at first, too used to the aggressive movements of orc war dances, but Jakob was endlessly patient, demonstrating again and again until her body learned the gentler rhythms. His hand was warm in hers as he led her through the steps. His other hand rested lightly on her waist, guiding but never controlling. They moved together around the small space, and Kragtha found herself hyper-aware of every point of contact between them. The way his breath quickened slightly when they moved faster. The way his eyes crinkled when she finally managed a complicated turn correctly. The way her own heart seemed to beat in time with the rhythm he was teaching her. "You're a natural," Jakob said after she successfully completed an entire dance sequence without a single mistake. "I think you've got it." "Your teaching is clear," Kragtha replied, and realized she was slightly breathless despite the exercise being nothing compared to her usual physical labor. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment, hands still joined, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker green in his blue-green eyes. Close enough that she could smell the clean scent of him, soap and honest sweat, and something uniquely Jakob. The moment stretched, charged with something she could not quite name, and then Jakob stepped back, breaking the connection. "We should get some rest," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Early morning tomorrow." Kragtha nodded and fled to the safety of her loft, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling beams, trying not to think about the warmth of Jakob's hand, or the gentleness in his eyes, or the way something in her chest seemed to ache when he smiled at her. This was not supposed to happen. She was not supposed to feel anything for this human, except perhaps grudging respect for his work ethic. She was supposed to stay detached, to fulfill her obligation, and then leave once the harvest was done. She was not supposed to start looking forward to mornings because it meant seeing him. Was not supposed to find herself listening for the sound of his voice, or seeking out his approval when she accomplished something difficult. But feelings, she was learning, did not care much about what was supposed to happen. The wheat began to turn from green to gold as summer deepened, and Jakob grew more focused on preparing for harvest. It would be the most critical time of the year, he explained, when months of work would be proven successful or wasted. Everything had to be perfectly coordinated. The wheat had to be cut at exactly the right time, when the kernels were mature but before they began to fall from the stalks. Then it needed to be bundled, shocked, and left to dry before being threshed and stored. "I've hired 2 men from the settlement to help," Jakob told her one evening. "Even with your strength and theirs, it's going to be brutal work. Dawn to dusk for at least a week, possibly two depending on the weather. Are you sure you're up for it? Kragtha gave him a flat look. I told you I was strong, I meant it. I know you're strong, Jakob said quickly. I just don't want you to feel obligated. This is hard labor and I will be there, Kragtha interrupted. We're partners, remember? That means I share the difficult work as well as the easy. Something in Jakob's expression softened into warmth that made her stomach flip. Partners, he agreed. Thank you, Kragtha. The midsummer festival arrived before harvest began, falling on the longest day of the year. Kragtha dressed in the nicest clothes she owned, which was not saying much, but Jakob assured her she looked perfect. They loaded the wagon with a basket of vegetables as their contribution to the communal feast, and made the journey to the settlement as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The central square had been transformed. Long tables groaned under the weight of food contributions from every farm. Musicians sat on a makeshift stage, tuning instruments. Lanterns hung from every available post and tree branch, ready to be lit as darkness fell. Children ran everywhere, their laughter high and bright. Adults clustered in groups, talking and laughing, drinks in hand. Kragtha felt every eye turn toward her as they arrived. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the crowd. But Jakob seemed unconcerned, parking the wagon and helping her down with a hand at her elbow that felt both protective and supportive. Mrs. Vance appeared almost immediately, bustling over with a wide smile. There you are. Jakob, take your wife to get some food before these vultures eat everything. Kragtha, dear, you simply must try my berry pie. I made 3, knowing you were coming. The fact that this woman had made extra food specifically with Kragtha in mind made something warm bloom in her chest. She let Mrs. Vance guide her toward the food tables, accepting a plate piled high with things she had never seen before. Roasted meats, fresh breads, vegetables prepared in styles her clan never used. And yes, a generous slice of berry pie that tasted like summer itself. Jakob stayed close, introducing her to people, deflecting the more intrusive questions, making it clear through body language alone that she was under his protection. But Kragtha noticed something else too. He introduced her not as my orc wife, but simply as Kragtha, my partner, giving her identity weight beyond her species or their legal arrangement. As the sun set and the lanterns were lit, the music began in earnest. The dances Jakob had taught her came to life as couples and groups took to the cleared space in the center of the square. He offered her his hand with a slight bow that was both playful and sincere. May I have this dance? Kragtha felt her pulse quicken but took his hand. You may. They joined the circle of dancers, and Kragtha focused on remembering the steps Jakob had taught her. 1, 2, 3, turn. Hand to the partner on the right, then the left. Circle together, then break apart. It was complicated, but her body remembered the rhythm, and Jakob was there whenever she faltered, his steady presence guiding her through. The dance ended, and another began, faster this time. Then another, slower and more intimate, requiring partners to stay close together. Jakob's hand found her waist again, her hand on his shoulder, their other hands clasped between them as they swayed to the music. This close, she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the sheen of sweat on his brow from the exertion, could watch the way his mouth curved into a smile as he looked at her. You're doing wonderfully, he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I have a good teacher, she replied, and meant it. The song shifted, becoming something slower still, almost melancholy. Other couples drew even closer together, some with heads resting on shoulders, some whispering to each other. Jakob's hand tightened slightly on her waist, drawing her incrementally nearer until there was barely any space between them. Kragtha's breath caught. This was different from the practice sessions in his farmhouse. This was public, deliberate, a statement to everyone watching that he was not ashamed to hold her close, that he saw her as a woman, not a monster, that whatever this thing was growing between them, he was not fighting it. She made a decision then, one that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She let herself relax into his hold, let her head come to rest against his shoulder, let herself pretend for just this moment that this was real, that they were not bound by treaty obligations and survival necessity, that this was a choice they were both making freely. Jakob's arms tightened around her, and she felt him let out a breath that might have been relief. They swayed together like that as the song wound down, and when it ended, they stayed holding each other for several heartbeats longer than strictly necessary. When they finally separated, Kragtha looked up to find Jakob watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Something intense and tender and questioning all at once. "Kragtha, he began, but was interrupted by Mrs. Vance calling for everyone's attention. The moment broke. They turned to watch as the settlement elder gave a speech about community and cooperation, and the importance of neighbors helping neighbors. Kragtha tried to focus on the words, but her mind was still spinning from the feeling of being held so carefully, so completely. The festival continued late into the night, but eventually Jakob suggested they head home. The ride back was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The moon was nearly full, painting the landscape in silver light. The air was finally cooling after the day's heat, carrying the sweet smell of wheat almost ready for harvest. "Did you have a good time?" Jakob asked as they approached the farm. "I did," Kragtha admitted. "Better than I expected. I'm glad." He paused, then added softly, "I like dancing with you." "I liked it too," she said, and felt her face heat despite the darkness hiding her blush. They unhitched the horses in companionable silence, working together with the ease of practice. But as they walked toward the house, Jakob stopped suddenly and turned to face her. The moonlight caught his features, highlighting the serious set of his jaw. "Kragtha, I need to tell you something," he said. "I know you said you would decide after harvest whether you want to stay or go. And I'll honor that promise. But I want you to know that I hope you'll choose to stay. Not because I need help with the farm, though I do, but because I've come to value having you here. Value your presence, your strength, your honesty. Value you." Kragtha's heart hammered in her chest. "Jakob." "You don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know, so that when you make your decision, you'll have all the information." He smiled, though it looked slightly pained. "Good night, Kragtha." He went into the house before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the moonlight with her thoughts in chaos. She climbed to her loft eventually and lay awake for hours, staring at nothing, feeling everything. She had come here expecting cruelty or at best indifference. Had been prepared to endure until she could escape. But Jakob had shown her something entirely different: respect, partnership, kindness. And now, apparently, genuine affection. He valued her, not as property or labor, but as a person. And somewhere along the way, despite all her resistance and determination to remain detached, she had started to value him too. To care about his smile and his stories and the way he hummed while he worked. To appreciate his patience and his gentleness, and his absolute refusal to treat her as anything less than his equal. It was terrifying. Because caring meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of being hurt. But it was also thrilling, like standing at the edge of a cliff knowing that jumping might mean flying. She did not know what she would decide after harvest. But she knew that the decision had become much more complicated than she had ever anticipated. Harvest came with the perfect weather, clear skies and low humidity that would allow the cut wheat to dry properly. Jakob's hired men arrived at dawn, two brothers named Thomas and William, who were friendly enough once they got over their initial wariness of Kragtha. Jakob explained the process, demonstrated the proper way to use the scythes, and then they all spread out across the wheat field to begin the backbreaking work. Kragtha quickly proved her worth. Her orc strength allowed her to swing the scythe for hours without tiring the way the human men did. She cut swath after swath of golden wheat, working with a focused intensity that left the others struggling to keep up. Jakob, working a few rows over, kept glancing at her with an expression that was equal parts amazement and something warmer. They worked from dawn until the sun grew too hot around midday, then took a break in the shade while Jakob passed around water and food. Thomas and William were warming to Kragtha, impressed by her work ethic and surprised by her dry sense of humor when she chose to deploy it. "You cut twice what I managed," Thomas said, shaking his head in admiration. No wonder Jakob looked so pleased with himself. "She's the best partner I could have asked for," Jakob said, and the pride in his voice made Kragtha's chest tighten. They returned to work in the late afternoon, continuing until the light began to fail. By the time they stopped for the night, an impressive portion of the field had been cleared. The cut wheat lay in neat rows, waiting to be bundled and shocked. The next several days followed the same pattern. Cut, bundle, shock. Cut, bundle, shock. The work was repetitive and exhausting, but there was something deeply satisfying about seeing the progress, about watching the wheat field transform from standing grain to neat rows of drying shocks. Kragtha fell into bed each night so tired that she barely remembered climbing the ladder, and woke each morning with muscles that ached until she worked the stiffness out. Jakob worked beside her throughout it all, never asking more of her than he was willing to do himself. When she lifted something particularly heavy, he was there to help balance it. When the sun grew fierce, he made sure she had water and shade breaks. When Thomas made an offhand comment about orcs being good for dumb labor, Jakob shut it down so quickly and firmly that the man apologized immediately and never said anything like it again. A week into harvest, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. They had known bad weather was a possibility, but the speed with which the clouds gathered was alarming. Jakob took one look at the darkening sky and started shouting orders. "We need to get as many shocks covered as possible before the rain hits. Kragtha, help me with the tarps. Thomas, William, start moving the bundles that are still loose into the barn." They worked frantically against the approaching storm, racing to protect their hard-won harvest. The wind picked up, whipping Kragtha's dark hair around her face and making the tarps difficult to control. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance. The first fat drops of rain began to fall just as they finished securing the last tarp. "Inside now," Jakob yelled, and they all ran for the barn as the sky opened up. The rain came in sheets, pounding against the barn roof with a roar that made conversation nearly impossible. Lightning flashed, illuminating the interior in stark white bursts. They stood catching their breath, soaked through despite their speed, watching water stream through the gaps in the barn walls. "Will the tarps hold?" Kragtha asked, having to shout to be heard. "Should do," Jakob yelled back. "As long as the wind doesn't get under them. If it does, we could lose everything." They waited out the worst of the storm in the barn, Thomas and William eventually curling up in the hay to sleep while the rain continued. But Jakob paced restlessly, going to the door every few minutes to check on the field. Kragtha understood his anxiety. Months of work, the farm's entire income for the season, all vulnerable to the whims of weather. She went to stand beside him at the door, watching the rain create rivers in the yard. Lightning illuminated the field, and she could see the tarp still in place, weighed down but holding. "It will be fine," she said with more confidence than she felt. "How can you be sure?" Jakob asked, not looking away from the storm. "Because you did everything you could to protect it, because you planned well and worked hard. And because sometimes you have to trust that your efforts will be enough." Jakob turned to look at her then, rain-soaked hair plastered to his forehead, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "When did you become the optimistic one?" Kragtha surprised herself by smiling. "I learned it from a stubborn farmer who refuses to give up even when things seem impossible." Something in Jakob's expression shifted, became more vulnerable. He opened his mouth as if to say something important, but at that moment, the wind shifted, howling around the barn with renewed fury. They both tensed, watching the field, but the tarps continued to hold. The storm raged for hours before finally blowing itself out. By morning, the sky was clear again, and miraculously, the field was intact. The tarps had held. The wheat was safe. Jakob stood surveying the scene with visible relief, and when he turned to Kragtha, his smile was brilliant. "We did it," he said. "We actually did it." "We did," she agreed and felt pride swell in her chest. This was her accomplishment too. Her work, her effort, her contribution to something larger than herself. The remainder of harvest proceeded smoothly. They finished cutting and shocking the wheat, then began the threshing process, separating the grain from the chaff. It was tedious work but necessary, and Kragtha tackled it with the same determination she brought to everything else. Thomas and William finished their contracted time, and left with payment and profuse thanks, telling everyone in the settlement about the incredible orc woman who had helped save Jakob's harvest. Finally, after 3 weeks of intensive labor, the wheat was fully processed and stored in the barn. Jakob calculated their yield and announced that it was the best harvest the farm had seen in 5 years. The relief and joy on his face were palpable, and Kragtha found herself feeling genuinely happy for him, proud to have contributed to this success. They celebrated with a special dinner, Jakob cooking a roast chicken with all the trimmings. They ate and talked late into the evening, recounting moments from harvest, laughing about near disasters that had been averted. The easy camaraderie between them had deepened into something more profound through the shared adversity and triumph. As they cleaned up after dinner, Jakob cleared his throat in that way that meant he had something important to say. "Harvest is done," he said, not looking at her. "Which means you said you would make your decision about whether to stay or go." Kragtha's hand stilled in the wash water. This was the moment she had been both anticipating and dreading, the moment when she would have to choose. "I know," she said quietly. "I meant what I said," Jakob continued, finally meeting her eyes. "If you want to leave, I'll give you travel money and a reference letter. No judgment, no anger. You've more than fulfilled any obligation. The harvest wouldn't have succeeded without you, and I'll always be grateful for that." "But," Kragtha prompted, hearing the unspoken word, "but I hope you'll stay." Jakob set down the dish he was drying and turned to face her fully. "I told you at the festival that I value you. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. Kragtha, over these past months, I've come to care for you deeply. You're strong and brave and honest in ways that constantly amaze me. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better. And I realize that I don't want this to just be a business partnership anymore. I want it to be real. I want you to stay because you want to, not because you feel obligated. I want." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "I want you to be my wife in truth, not just on paper." Kragtha's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She stared at this human man who had shown her nothing but kindness, who had never once treated her as less than fully human despite her green skin and tusks and pointed ears, who had given her respect, partnership, and now apparently his heart. "You barely know me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I know enough," Jakob replied. "I know you're loyal to your core. I know you'll fight fiercely for anything you care about. I know you have a strength that goes far beyond physical. I know that when you smile, really smile, it feels like the sun coming out. I know that I'm happiest when I'm working beside you. And I know that the thought of you leaving makes me feel like I'm losing something irreplaceable." He took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in those blue-green eyes. "But I also know that you deserve to choose your own path, so I'm not asking you to decide right now. Stay through autumn. Stay through winter if you want. Give yourself time to really know if this is what you want. And if it's not, I'll let you go, even though it will hurt. Because you deserve to be happy, Kragtha, wherever that happiness is found." Kragtha felt tears prickling at her eyes, which was ridiculous because she was a warrior. She did not cry. But she was also a woman standing in front of a man who saw her, truly saw her, and was offering her something she had not even known she wanted. A home. A partnership. Love. "I don't know how to be a wife," she whispered. "I was raised to be a warrior. I know fighting and survival and little else." "You know how to work alongside someone," Jakob said gently. "How to communicate, how to compromise, how to contribute to something larger than yourself. That's what marriage is at its core. The rest we can figure out together. What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm too rough, too aggressive, too orc?" Jakob smiled and reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted before taking her hand in his. His calloused palm pressed against her rougher one, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You're exactly what I need," he said. "I don't want you to change. I want you to be yourself, fully and completely. That's who I'm asking to stay. That's who I've fallen for, fallen for." The words echoed in her mind, and Kragtha realized with sudden clarity that she had fallen too. Somewhere between the vegetable garden and the dance floor and the harvest field, she had fallen completely for this gentle, stubborn, patient man who treated her like an equal and looked at her like she was something precious. "I want to stay," she heard herself say, and the relief that flooded Jakob's face was like watching dawn break. "Not because I feel obligated, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I want to be here, with you. I want this to be real." Jakob's smile was incandescent. "Really?" "You mean it." "I mean it," Kragtha confirmed and felt her own lips curve into a matching smile. "You strange human man who saw a partner instead of a monster, who gave me respect when I expected cruelty, who taught me that strength comes in many forms and that nurturing can be as powerful as fighting. Yes, I want to stay. I want to be your wife in truth." "Thank you," Jakob breathed, and then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her close in a way that was both celebratory and tender. Kragtha wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in his familiar scent. Her heart felt too big for her chest, swollen with emotion she was only beginning to understand. They stood like that for a long moment, before Jakob pulled back slightly to look at her face. His expression was wondering, like he could not quite believe this was happening. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made her love him even more. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and then his lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning at first. Kragtha had never kissed anyone before, had no experience with this kind of intimacy, but her body seemed to know what to do. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to frame his face, her tusks making the angle slightly awkward but neither of them caring. The kiss deepened, became more confident, full of promise and possibility. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Kragtha felt like something fundamental had shifted in the universe. Like she had finally found the place where she was always meant to be. "So what happens now?" she asked. Jakob's smile was soft and full of joy. "Now we build a life together. As real partners, as husband and wife in every sense. We work the farm, we weather the seasons, we figure things out as we go. Together." "Together," Kragtha repeated, and the word felt like a vow. Autumn arrived in a blaze of color as the trees turned red and gold. Kragtha and Jakob fell into new rhythms, still working as partners, but now with an added dimension of intimacy that made everything feel charged with possibility. They shared meals, shared stories, shared the work of preparing the farm for winter. And they shared a bed, having decided together that the separation between the loft and the bedroom no longer made sense. Jakob was patient and careful with her inexperience, always asking, always making sure she was comfortable. Kragtha discovered that intimacy was another form of communication, another way of expressing the emotions that sometimes felt too big for words. She learned the geography of his body, the places that made him gasp or sigh. He learned hers, approaching her with the same attentive care he brought to everything in his life. They began making plans for the future. Jakob wanted to expand the vegetable garden, maybe add some fruit trees. Kragtha suggested getting a few goats for milk and cheese, drawing on knowledge from her clan's herding practices. They talked about improvements to the house, about making the loft into a proper second bedroom for when children might come. Though both agreed, they wanted time together first, before expanding their family. One evening, as they sat by the fire watching the flames dance, Kragtha realized she had not thought about her father or her clan in weeks. The anger that had sustained her through the journey to this place had faded into something more complicated. Sadness for what had been lost, yes, but also gratitude for what had been found. Her father's decision to send her away, motivated by whatever combination of practicality and prejudice, had inadvertently given her something precious. A chance at happiness she never would have had otherwise. "Do you ever regret it?" Jakob asked, as if reading her thoughts. Agreeing to come here, Kragtha considered the question seriously. "I regret that I didn't have a choice initially. I regret that my father saw me as expendable rather than valuable, but I don't regret ending up here, with you. That part feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Jakob reached over and took her hand, threading their fingers together in a gesture that had become natural to both of them. "I'm glad you're here. I can't imagine this place without you anymore." "Good," Kragtha said with a slight smile. "Because you're stuck with me now." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Jakob replied, and kissed her knuckles with a tenderness that still made her heart flutter. Mrs. Vance visited regularly through the autumn, ostensibly to trade goods, but really, Kragtha suspected, to check on them and gossip. The older woman had appointed herself as a combination mentor and friend, teaching Kragtha things about running a household that her warrior upbringing had never covered. How to preserve vegetables for winter, how to make soap from lye and fat, how to mend clothing with stitches so small they were nearly invisible. "You're a quick study," Mrs. Vance said one afternoon as they worked together on a quilt. "And Jakob is clearly happier than I've seen him since his father died. You're good for each other." "He's good for me," Kragtha said, focusing on her stitching. "He sees me as a person, not a weapon or a burden." "As he should," Mrs. Vance said firmly. "Any man who doesn't see his wife's worth is a fool. And whatever else Jakob Peterson might be, he's no fool." As winter approached, the settlement held a harvest festival to celebrate the season's successes. Kragtha attended with much less trepidation than she had felt at the midsummer celebration. She was becoming a familiar presence now, no longer a shocking novelty. Some people were still wary, but many had warmed to her, particularly after word spread about how instrumental she had been in saving Jakob's wheat harvest during the storm. She danced with Jakob again, and this time there was no hesitation in how they held each other. They moved together with the ease of partners who knew each other's rhythms, who trusted each other completely. When the music ended, Jakob surprised her by pulling her aside to a quieter area near the edge of the square. "I have something for you," he said, and pulled a small cloth bundle from his pocket. Kragtha unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver necklace with a pendant in the shape of a wheat sheaf. It was beautiful and clearly expensive, far more than she had expected. "Jakob, this is too much," she protested. "No, it's not," he said firmly, taking the necklace and moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. "You've given me so much. Your strength, your partnership, your trust, your heart. You've made this farm more successful than I ever could have alone. You've made my life full in ways I didn't even know were empty. This is just a token, a symbol of what you mean to me." Kragtha touched the pendant, feeling the weight of it settle against her collarbone. "Thank you," she whispered, turning to face him. "I'll treasure it." "I'll treasure you," Jakob replied and kissed her softly. Winter settled over the farm like a blanket, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The pace of work slowed as the fields lay dormant, giving Jakob and Kragtha more time together indoors. They spent long evenings by the fire, Jakob carving his wooden figures while Kragtha practiced the needlework Mrs. Vance had taught her. Sometimes they read aloud from the small collection of books Jakob's father had accumulated. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content with each other's presence. Kragtha learned about human winter traditions. They celebrated the solstice with a special feast and decorated the house with evergreen boughs. Jakob taught her card games and they played for hours, competitive but laughing. When snow fell heavily enough to make travel dangerous, they were content to be isolated together, the rest of the world fading away. One particularly cold night, wrapped in blankets by the fire with Jakob's arms around her, Kragtha realized she had not had a nightmare in months. The dreams that had plagued her since childhood, violent memories of battles and loss, had faded away. She felt safe here in a way she never had before. Protected not by walls or weapons but by love and partnership. "What are you thinking about?" Jakob murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "That I'm happy," Kragtha said simply. "Truly happy. I didn't know that was possible for someone like me. Someone like you." Jakob shifted so he could see her face. "You mean someone strong and brave and wonderful. Why wouldn't happiness be possible for you? I was raised to believe that orcs were meant for fighting, for survival, for struggle. That softness was weakness and emotional attachment was dangerous. Happiness was not something we were taught to pursue." Jakob's expression softened with understanding and sadness. "That sounds like a lonely way to live." "It was," Kragtha admitted, "but I didn't know any different until I came here, until you showed me another way." "You've given me so many gifts, Jakob. A home, a purpose, respect. But the greatest gift is showing me that I can be both strong and soft, that I can fight when necessary but also nurture and create and love, that being a warrior and being a wife are not mutually exclusive." "You've given me gifts too," Jakob said. "You've made me braver, made me see possibilities I never considered. You've brought life and energy to this farm that was missing when I was alone, and you've loved me despite all the ways I'm imperfect and flawed." "You're not flawed," Kragtha protested. "You're patient and kind and honest, and I'm stubborn and too serious and I hum off key." Jakob interrupted with a slight smile. But you love me anyway, which makes me the luckiest man alive. I do love you, Kragtha said, and the words came easily now, no longer frightening. More than I thought possible. I love you too, Jakob replied, and kissed her with a sweetness that made her melt into him. Spring returned eventually, as it always did, bringing new work and new challenges. But Kragtha faced them with enthusiasm rather than resentment. This was her farm now, her home, her life. She and Jakob worked side by side, planting new crops, welcoming baby animals, repairing winter damage. Everything felt purposeful and meaningful because they were building it together. Mrs. Vance visited on a warm spring afternoon and announced that she had news. The Settlement Council wants to officially recognize you as a full member of our community, she told Kragtha. They're planning a ceremony for next month. You'd have all the rights and protections that come with citizenship. It's quite an honor. Kragtha was stunned. Why would they do that? Because you've proven yourself a valuable member of this community, Mrs. Vance said as if it were obvious. You've worked hard, helped your neighbors, shown yourself to be trustworthy and skilled. Plus, several people have mentioned that having an orc perspective in community discussions might prevent some of the prejudicial thinking that has caused problems in the past. They want me to participate in community decisions, Kragtha asked, still processing. Of course. You're bright, you're practical, and you have experience with things most of us don't. Why wouldn't they want your input? Jakob, standing beside Kragtha with barely contained pride, squeezed her hand. You deserve this recognition, everything you've contributed. The ceremony was held on a sunny day in late spring, with what seemed like the entire settlement gathered in the central square. Kragtha stood beside Jakob, wearing her best clothes and the wheat sheaf necklace he had given her, as the settlement elder spoke about community and acceptance and the value of diversity. When she was officially welcomed as a full citizen, the crowd applauded, and Kragtha felt tears threaten for the second time since arriving in this strange human territory. Mrs. Vance hugged her fiercely. Welcome home, dear, home. The word resonated deep in Kragtha's chest. This was home. Not the clan lands where she had been born but never fully belonged. Here, in this small settlement on the frontier, surrounded by humans who had learned to see past her green skin and tusks to the person beneath. Here, with Jakob, building a life that was entirely their own. That night, as they returned to the farm, Jakob pulled her into his arms on the porch, holding her close as the sun set over the wheat fields. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to know you can say no if it doesn't feel right. What is it? Kragtha asked, though she thought she might already know. Jakob pulled back slightly and took both her hands in his. When you first arrived, we were married by law and treaty but not by choice. Not really. I want to change that. I want us to have a real wedding, here in the settlement, with our friends and neighbors as witnesses. I want to marry you again, but this time as a choice we're both making freely. Will you marry me, Kragtha? Not because of treaties or obligations, but because we love each other. Kragtha felt joy bubble up in her chest like a spring. Yes, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I'll marry you, again, properly. Jakob's grin was brilliant as he lifted her and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his love and commitment into the gesture. They planned the wedding for midsummer, giving them time to prepare and send word to anyone they wanted to invite. To Kragtha's surprise, Jakob suggested she send a message to her clan, offering them the opportunity to attend if they wished. They're still your family, he said gently. Even if they hurt you, you should at least give them the chance. So Kragtha sent a carefully worded letter to her father, explaining that she was well, that she had found happiness, and that she would be formally marrying Jakob Peterson in a human ceremony. She invited her family to attend, but made it clear that their presence was not required for her happiness. She did not expect a response, so she was shocked when, 2 weeks before the wedding, her younger sister Makra arrived at the farm. Kragtha opened the door to find her sister standing there, looking uncertain and slightly defiant, a travel pack slung over her shoulder. Makra. Kragtha breathed, hardly believing her eyes. "Father forbade us from coming," Makra said without preamble. "Said you had made your choice and were no longer part of the clan, but I disagreed. You're my sister, so I came anyway." She paused, then added more quietly, "I've been cast out for it. For choosing you over his authority." Kragtha felt anger flare at her father's stubbornness, but also overwhelming love for her sister's bravery. She pulled Makra into a fierce hug. "You're welcome here, for as long as you want to stay." Jakob appeared behind Kragtha and, reading the situation quickly, offered Makra the same warm smile he had given Kragtha so many months ago. "Welcome to Greenbrier Farm. Any family of Kragtha's is family of mine. Come in, please. You must be exhausted from traveling." Over the next few days, Makra settled into the farm, taking over the loft that had been Kragtha's original room. She was younger than Kragtha by 3 years, not quite as physically imposing but sharing the same fierce spirit. She watched Kragtha and Jakob together with wide eyes, clearly amazed by the easy affection and partnership between them. "I never imagined it could be like this," Makra confessed one evening when the sisters were alone in the garden. "Father always said humans were cruel and treacherous. That you would be treated as property at best, abused at worst. But Jakob treats you like an equal, like someone precious." "He does," Kragtha agreed, pulling weeds with practiced efficiency. "Not all humans are kind, I'm sure, just as not all orcs are warriors, but Jakob is good, truly good. He's shown me that the prejudices we were raised with are wrong. That connection between different people is possible if both sides are willing to try." "Father was wrong about so many things," Makra said quietly. "About you being expendable, about you being too difficult. You're not difficult. You're just strong enough to question things that don't make sense." Kragtha reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "You're strong too. It took tremendous courage to defy Father and come here. I'm proud of you." Makra helped with the wedding preparations, throwing herself into the work with enthusiasm. Mrs. Vance took charge of organizing the ceremony, recruiting half the settlement to help with decorations, food, and arrangements. The event grew beyond what Kragtha and Jakob had initially envisioned, becoming a true community celebration. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. The ceremony was held in the settlement's central square, which had been transformed with flowers, ribbons, and garlands. Chairs had been arranged in rows, and it seemed like every person from the surrounding farms had come to witness. Kragtha wore a dress that Mrs. Vance had helped her make, simple but elegant, in a deep green that complemented her skin tone. Her dark hair had been braided with flowers woven throughout. She wore her wheat sheaf necklace proudly. Makra stood beside her as her attendant, wearing her own best clothes and looking almost as nervous as Kragtha felt. Jakob waited at the front, wearing clothes that were clearly new, probably specially made for this occasion. His hair had been trimmed, though it still fell slightly into his eyes in the way Kragtha found endearing. When he saw her, his entire face lit up with joy and love, and all of Kragtha's nerves settled. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. They walked toward each other, meeting in the middle as equals, as partners. The settlement elder began the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the bonds that tie people together across any differences. But Kragtha barely heard the words, too focused on Jakob's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the most important person in the world. When it came time for vows, Jakob went first. Kragtha, when you arrived at my farm, you warned me that you wouldn't be tamed. I told you I needed a partner, and you've been that and so much more. You've been my strength when I was weak, my courage when I was afraid, my joy when life felt hard. You've taught me that love is not about changing someone but about accepting them fully, celebrating who they are. I promise to always see you, truly see you, and to value everything that makes you who you are. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to share both burdens and triumphs. I promise to love you, not in spite of your differences but because of them, for all the days of my life. Kragtha swallowed hard, fighting tears, before speaking her own vows. Jakob, you saw me when others saw only a monster. You offered me partnership when I expected servitude. You gave me respect when I had been taught I deserved none. You've shown me that strength comes in many forms, that gentleness is not weakness, and that love can bridge any divide. I promise to work beside you, to face challenges together, to build a life that honors both our dreams. I promise to love you with everything I am, to be faithful in all things, and to choose you every day, for all the days we're given. The elder pronounced them husband and wife, properly married by choice and commitment, and Jakob kissed her as the assembled crowd erupted in applause. Kragtha kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into the gesture, and felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. The celebration that followed was joyous and chaotic. There was music and dancing, more food than anyone could possibly eat, and toasts that ranged from heartfelt to hilariously inappropriate. Kragtha danced with Jakob, with Makra, with Mrs. Vance, with several of the neighbors who had become friends. She laughed until her sides hurt and ate until she was stuffed and felt surrounded by warmth and acceptance. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Jakob pulled her away from the celebration for a moment of quiet. They stood at the edge of the square, looking out at the farms and fields stretching into the distance, painted in the golden light of sunset. "Happy?" Jakob asked, his arm around her waist. "Incredibly," Kragtha replied, leaning into his warmth. "I never thought I could feel this way. Never thought I deserved it. You deserve everything good in this world," Jakob said firmly, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you." "You already have," Kragtha told him, turning to face him fully. "You've given me a home, a purpose, a family, a future. You've given me yourself. That's everything I could ever want." They kissed again as the sun set behind them, sealing their commitment with the timeless gesture of love recognized by every culture, every people. And in that moment, Kragtha understood that she had not been tamed, as she had feared. She had been freed from the limitations others had placed on her, freed from the narrow path her birth had seemed to destine her for, freed to become fully herself, to love and be loved, to build a life entirely of her own choosing. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter, winter to spring again. Kragtha and Jakob worked their farm, weathered storms both literal and metaphorical, and built a life that was uniquely theirs. Makra stayed on, becoming an integral part of the farm, and eventually marrying one of the settlement men herself, proving that the alliance between humans and orcs could grow beyond a single couple. Mrs. Vance remained a constant presence, becoming more like family than friend, eventually insisting they call her grandmother Vance, when Kragtha and Jakob's first child was born 3 years after the wedding. a daughter with her mother's green skin and her father's blue-green eyes, perfectly straddling two worlds, accepted and loved by both. The settlement continued to grow more diverse as word spread about the successful integration of orc families. Other mixed marriages followed, other bridges built between peoples who had been enemies. And at the center of it all was Greenbrier Farm, where an orc woman and a human man had proved that love, respect, and partnership could overcome any prejudice. Years later, when the farm had expanded to twice its original size, and their family had grown to include 3 children, Kragtha would sometimes stand on the porch at sunset, surveying everything she and Jakob had built together. The golden wheat fields, the expanded gardens, the new barn, the fences repaired and reinforced, the home that had grown to accommodate their growing family. Jakob would join her, as he always did, slipping an arm around her waist in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Any regrets? He would ask, the same question he had posed so many years ago, and Kragtha would smile, that genuine expression of joy she had learned from him, and give the same answer she always gave. Not a single one. You said you needed a partner. I'd say you found the perfect one. We both did, Jakob would reply and kiss her as the sun painted their world in gold. They had started as strangers bound by treaty and necessity. They had become partners through work and respect. And they had transformed into a love story that would be told for generations in the settlement. Proof that the bravest thing anyone can do is choose to open their heart, even when everything says it is impossible. Kragtha had arrived at Greenbrier Farm expecting to fight for every scrap of dignity and freedom. Instead, she had found a man who offered her both without hesitation, who saw her not as something to be tamed or controlled, but as an equal worthy of respect and love. And in accepting his offer and choosing to stay and build a life together, she had discovered the greatest strength of all, the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to love without reservation. She had warned him she would not be tamed. He had smiled and said good, he needed a partner. And they had both been right. She had remained untamed, wild and strong and fierce. But she had also become something more, loved, valued, home, and that made all the difference.